Hello. Before I talk about the subject of this video, can I briefly say that I have 3 book haul videos going live this month. One on the 13th, one on the 20th, and one on the 25th. And the reason that I brought my regular weekly release forward is covered in my recent post. So if you want to know why I'm releasing on Christmas Day, can I ask that you check out my recent post. I'm not planning any other videos for this month, though that may change. Right, the subject of this video is SF collecting in London. But before I get into that, I'll briefly mention another short that I watched, and I thought it was quite interesting. And it was covering how you recognise you're becoming a collector rather than a reader. Now, if you've seen my sort of notes on my site, I say I morphed into being a collector perhaps 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And I thought it was quite interesting that this short covered some of the examples that might show you you're beginning to change. The first that she mentioned was that you have more than one copy of a book. And I certainly have several copies of several books. There can be various reasons. I might have both a British edition and an American edition. I might also have a signed edition. I might have a hardcover. I might have other copies, for example, because I want to complete a book series. So that first point that she made, I totally recognise in myself. The second reason she said you might recognise you're becoming a book collector is because you look for specific editions, whether that's because of, pardon me, the artwork, whether it's because of the printing, whether it's because you like a certain format, perhaps A format as opposed to B format. And I, again, have certainly recognised this in myself. I've always fussed over condition where possible, but I do now look for other things, such as the edition, signatures, and all the rest. So that, again, I recognised. The third point that she made is that collectors may give books as presents, and I suppose the opposite also applies. If asked what they'd like as a present, they may say they want a book. Now, I've not generally given books as presents. My wife isn't a great reader. My son prefers reading the electronic versions, the e-books. So, by and large, I haven't bought for them. But it is something that I recognise. When my wife asked me recently what I'd like for Christmas, I did suggest a book. And I found one on the internet that I quite like. But I said, don't go too dear. When I looked, the opening bid required was about £100, including postage. But in the end, £200 didn't win it. So while I want certain books, I won't go to the extremes that some collectors will. Right, moving on to SF collecting in London. Those who watch my videos might know that I'm a little bit disillusioned with what I can find in London these days. Certainly in terms of vintage books, what is available is very limited. In London, there are opportunities to find signed books, new releases. So there are opportunities here, perhaps not the ones I would most like. So looking back a little bit at the history, in terms of books and book selling and book collecting, it's a market. So I thought I'd look at, first of all, the position from the seller's point of view. In the last century, in terms of used bookshops, there were always at least, I think, half a dozen within about 5 miles of where I lived. In terms of SF collecting, there were also the specialist sellers. There was At the Sign of the Dragon. There was Dark They Were and Golden Eyed, though I must admit I never actually went to that shop. There was the Fantasy Centre. That closed in 2009. At the Sign of the Dragon closed in 2002. There was Murder One, and I forget when that closed, at least 10 years ago, I think. And that used to have a large science fiction selection and also had some used books. So there were always massive opportunities in London. There were the main booksellers as well. You had W.H. Smith. I think there was always Waterstones and Foyles and one or two others. The Charing Cross Road had both new bookshops and used bookshops. So there was massive opportunity. But nowadays, pretty much all there is as a specialist is Forbidden Planet. The Charing Cross Road has deteriorated, in my view. The local area, to me, whereas it once had many bookshops, I think there is one bookshop, traditional bookshop left, and that doesn't stock much science fiction. It's not the area they're interested in. And within about 5 miles of the house, I think that there are 3 charity bookshops. So the number in total has reduced and the variety has reduced. So why has that happened? Well, I think mainly the margins on books won't support a huge book selling range of shops. How can I put it? The cost pressures are hitting shops. In London, shop rents have shot up. Business rates have gone up, and they face high staff costs, made worse by the recent budgets, especially with increases in minimum wage and national insurance. So shops face considerable cost pressures, and certainly the variety that's available in London has reduced significantly. I think those pressures will spread around the country, but they are most evident in London. But the market is also affected by changes of consumers. Like shops, consumers face cost pressures, cost of living issues. In London, there are now far more many people who rent, and rents have shot up in the private sector. And so consumers can't afford large properties, and let's face it, books, if you collect a lot, do take up a lot of room. So consumers face pressures as well. Also, consumer habits have changed, especially amongst the younger generation. I watched a recent video of an interview with John Grisham. and he talked about streaming of TV and films, and his general view was if people have a couple of hours to spare, they're far more likely to stream or play games than to sit down and read a book. You probably need a little bit more free time to spare for reading a book. There have been other changes as well. One trend in the early 2000s was decluttering. And many people got rid of things. The trend was, if you haven't used something for a year, if you haven't picked it up and looked at it, then get rid of it. Now, I'm not of that ilk. I'm more of a hoarder. I keep things unless they're broken or damaged or whatever. But some people definitely did get rid of things. I think there is a market for second-hand. More people nowadays tend to buy second-hand, and they use the charity shops. And I have done a couple of videos about charity shops. And one of the things I've sort of noticed with charity shop, perhaps in the early 2000s, they were overwhelmed with books. They perhaps hadn't recognised the extra value that can be found if you know how to sort and check books. Now that has changed nowadays. Charity shops try and make every penny they can from books. They research everything, so the bargains have gone. So that is a significant change. And charity shops that couldn't sell books, or perhaps because they priced them too dear, charge more than the market would bear, they would send off the unsold items to what I'll call book warehouses. So an example might be World of Books, but there are many others. Now, I don't know exactly what these book warehouses do, but basically I have a strong suspicion that a significant proportion of the books they collect from charity shops and donations and other things end up being pulped for the waste paper content. So that meant there was a large loss of stock. I think that was particularly bad during the decluttering era. And nowadays in London, it is extremely difficult to find the older A format paperbacks. Another consumer issue is that London has always been a temporary lodging for many people. Now, I was born in London, I've always been a Londoner. But for some, they move from other parts of the country. Quite often they will maintain a property, or their parents will maintain a property elsewhere. And quite often, if space is tight, their books will go back to wherever they come from. Another trend that has been more evident in recent years is that people emigrate abroad for better weather, and they'll either take their books with them or they disposed of them. So gradually I think there has been a reduction in the availability of books that can be found. Another issue is, I suppose, consumer habits change. The reading habits have changed. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but perhaps the sort of fighting fantasy or heroic fantasy of perhaps the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s has largely disappeared. And while science fiction maintains a reasonable hold, we've seen new trends for romantasy, perhaps bigger, bulkier fantasy series. So many things have changed. In terms of going back to competition for shops, there are many other sources Obviously, there are online sources. There's Amazon, mainly for new books, but they do also do other used books. eBay perhaps was always the best for used books, but there's now competition, although I never use them. Things like Vinted and what else? Facebook Marketplace and one or two other reasons. So there are many, many changes. Also, I think the nature of the population is the word demographics of London. In the last century, by far the bulk of the people in London were British, and that has changed. The population from other countries, perhaps with other languages, and I saw a recent poll or survey that said there are now 300 languages spoken in London, and the odds are those people who speak other languages will tend to buy or look for books in their own language. That's not exclusive, and I'm not trying to make a particular point about immigration, but there have been changes in the population in London. So all in all, there have been a large number of changes, which from my point of view has spoilt the market in terms of what I look for. I think that's all I'm going to say on this subject. I don't normally do these chatty videos, but I had one spare weekend this month, and so I've done this video to fill that gap. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you enjoy the next 3, which are all book haul videos. Thank you. That's it.